Hi guys, Pastor CJ with Grace of the Lord Church, and my goal today is to tell you a little bit about our phased-in strategy for regathering. I'm sure you've all been wondering, what is our plan for the future moving forward as the state starts to lift guidelines that were imposed on us at the beginning of the COVID crisis. So we have a phased-in regathering strategy. I want a full disclaimer. The specifics of operation under each phase are going to be subject to change based on the dynamic nature of state guidelines, our own resources, and our convictions as things change. This model is a prediction, right? And this assumes that change is going to be likely, because one thing that we've learned throughout the history of the COVID crisis is that we need to be adaptable. So anything that we predict or assume has to be subject to change. Because complete predictability is really unrealistic during this time. So therefore, we're doing our best to lay out a plan and moving forward with the expectation of flexibility. With that said, take a look at this graphic to see an idea of what you can expect moving forward. The first phase we're calling Safer at Home, after the title that the state guidelines are calling our current phase. This phase is about the vulnerable still being under shelter-in-place orders by the state, and currently gatherings are limited to 10 people or less. So for us, this means the phase is all about offering essential spiritual services without taking any risks. This assumes that we need to be able to minister to people who have to stay in their homes while offering services to people who are able to come out of their homes, and only offering those services when they're using safety precautions. What we're doing right now under this Safer at Home Phase 1 that we're currently in is offering small groups, both live and online, with all our usual weekday groups being live, including our Tuesday night Bible study, our Wednesday night 2-me class, are all live in church. And we're also offering one virtual weekday small group for youth on Wednesday nights, and one virtual Sunday morning group for everybody to join before church. Those are both via online video chat. We're not offering any live church services. All our church services are done online. However, we are offering small group gatherings that will take place at the church on Sunday mornings to watch the online service. That's in order to offer a Christian community connection for those of us who are really craving that togetherness. Many of our outreaches are currently canceled, but we do still have some outreaches active right now. No child care is being offered during any of our gatherings at this time. Nobody is expected to join the live grace groups, but everybody is expected to participate in our grace groups, whether they are online or in person. One way or the other, there's a grace group for you, and we are expecting everybody to participate in those somehow. The vulnerable are encouraged not to participate in any of our live groups or live outreaches. But whoever is comfortable enough to do non-essential business of any kind is expected to participate in our outreaches, and if their schedule allows, they're expected to participate in our live grace groups. During the next phase, Phase 2, which we're calling the Love Your Neighbor phase, that's our version of the Protect Your Neighbor phase that the state is calling the next phase. In that phase, the state says that the vulnerable are going to be allowed out, no longer under shelter-in-place orders, and larger gatherings are going to be allowed with restrictions in place. For us, this phase is going to be all about us protecting our vulnerable loved ones while advancing our church towards the way it should be. At this phase, church services will probably go live again, but they'll be split into multiple services to reduce crowds while maintaining the online church service as it is. Our in-person church services may be indoors or maybe outdoors depending on the weather, but there will be live church services for you to come to. Some Sunday morning grace groups may open during this time while we maintain our online Sunday morning grace group. Once our teen Sunday school is live, The virtual youth group on Wednesday night may be dismissed. Childcare may be offered for parents who are present for the live church services based on volunteer availability, because we don't know what our volunteer capacity is going to be. All of our outreaches will be reinstated unless they are otherwise impossible during this phase, although each outreach will probably look a little different than they usually do based on the safety measures that will need to be in place. The non-vulnerable will be encouraged to attend one of our live services and a live grace group, at least one outreach a month as well. The vulnerable will be encouraged to decide for themselves if they will join a live grace group or a church service. During phase 3, we're calling this phase Getting Closer, just because we don't have a title for this phase from the state that we can adapt for our own. So phase 3 is we're calling Getting Closer. And in this phase, many restrictions will have been lifted completely or decreased considerably, while there still will be some restrictions in place. For us, this phase is all about reintroducing our vulnerable loved ones into any spiritual services that they have not connected to in the previous phases, as much as is safely possible. Some things you'll expect to see will be that church services are all definitely live again, and the setting is going to be a lot more typical as we use our usual sanctuary. Our online church services will still be available, but they'll be winding down to encourage live attendance. Sunday morning grace groups will all be live. Childcare will be available. However, our transportation ministry is going to be limited if it is active. Restrictions will probably exclude picking up children without parents because our volunteer capacity will be limited. But transportation will be offered for adults and families. All outreaches will be reinstated by this point and are operating with some restrictions that are still likely in place. The non-vulnerable will be expected to attend one of our live church services, a live grace group, and at least one outreach per month. The vulnerable are likely to be joining us for live church services and grace groups at this point, but will not be expected to if they're not comfortable. In the last phase, phase 4, we're calling this phase the way it should be. At this point, all restrictions are lifted, or at least as far as it would impact our small church. Other churches with larger congregations may still be under restrictions, but the state guidelines at this point won't be relevant to a small church our size. In this phase, everybody should be effectively connected to the spiritual opportunities without restrictions or limitations, because by this point, it'll be safe. At this point, the full online church experience will be dismissed, and only the sermon will be premiered. This will be a recording of the practice sermon so that it can go live at the same time as our church service, an effort for us to maintain our out-of-town online congregation. At this point, all grace groups, weekday and Sunday morning, are live, and all virtual groups are going to be dismissed. Everyone is expected to join at least one live grace group at this point. All outreaches will be reinstated, and all are expected to participate in outreaches in some way. Church services will be held live, and everybody will be expected to join us for those. The transportation ministry at this point will be available to anybody, including children without parents. Child care will be available without restrictions, and everything will be the way it should be. Another disclaimer about this phased-in regathering strategy is that we don't have a timeline for when we will get from one phase to the next. We'll be following state guidelines closely, and we'll also be patiently observing what other churches and businesses are going to be doing. For example, we'll be watching how restaurants and entertainment industries will be handling state guidelines, and we'll probably be trying to adapt some of their models to what we do in our context. We will then determine when it is safe to move into the next phase. Also, notice in our graphic, we have the ladder and the elevator, implying that we could go up or down from the various levels. Because honestly, we may experience some back and forth between these phases. We're going to be following state and city guidelines as we move from phase to phase, And the reality is we may have to make backward progress from time to time. So we get to phase 3, we might have to move back to phase 2 if it doesn't work. And we might get to phase 4 and have to move back to phase 3. We're just really going to be planning for some back and forth and adaptability as we model what we'll do next with state guidelines and other industries. I hope this helps to answer as many of your questions as we possibly could. And please stay tuned to your emails for up-to-date information and notifications as we start to advance from one phase to the next.